Okay. Mm-hmm. What's up, YouTube? We are Team Troponin. We are going to go through the Troponin episodes, episode 12. Just want to say thanks again for listening. If you like our content, please like, subscribe, leave us some comments, and turn on notifications so that you know when we post things. We try to put out a couple of episodes each week, so if you turn those on, you'll know when we post. We talked a lot about nutrition. We've done a lot on different exogenous help episodes. One other thing that we want to talk about is training. Most of you who have followed Justin for a long time know that he's one of the things that he really brings to training, and something Dave and I really resonated with when we were looking for a coach, was the intensity that he brings. Like, you watch Justin train and nothing's easy. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of how you got started with training intensity and kind of where you implement, things like rest pause techniques, your experience with DC training, all of that?
Yeah, I didn't start for bodybuilding. I really didn't. I saw the magazine and stuff, but for me, it was all football. That's all. That was the only thing I cared about. I mean, literally, that was my whole life. I'm 5'10", so it didn't go as far as I would have liked it to, but that was it. And I had a training partner, Mike Hickey, who was just an impossibly strong teenager. I think he squatted over 600 pounds when in high school, bench 405. But he had a workload tolerance and recoverability. We were completely natural, at the time. Unlike any human that I never knew I trained hard or had a high, because he murdered me in the gym. I could never beat him. Our conditioning drills, he would always kill me training. And so I didn't know. We trained at this little health club, Birchwood Athletic Club. It was a racquetball court that had a little weight area,
It was you and a bunch of 60-year-old dudes, basically?
Yeah. So we didn't know
That's great.
I never saw Bodybuilder, never saw Powerlifter. It was just us two. And we had nothing to go on but the rare Powerlifting USA we could find at GNC, and then the muscle magazines I'd make my mom buy because I was too embarrassed when I was 15 and still small. But we would, we just didn't know any better. He refused to read any magazines because he didn't want to know. He thought if he knew there was a limit that he would just not be able to break that limit. And he thought if he just didn't know it, it wouldn't matter. And so we had no idea about anything. We knew we wanted big legs because we thought football legs, And I remember reading something about Barry Sanders squatting or something. And so we even so much so that we used to have to tell if someone was pulling a prank or something, and we needed to know if they were telling the truth or not, we'd say, swear on your legs, meaning if I'm lying, I'm going to lose leg size. And we knew it didn't work, but we were so worried that we might lose leg size that we weren't willing to risk it. So no matter what, if he said swear on your legs, you're like, okay, no, I'm lying.
We're going to start using that.
I will. Yeah. But we just knew that's what it was. He had an absolutely insane recovery ability, and neither of us knew any better. So we would do one of our common leg workouts was 405 for 10 sets of 10 on squat, which I'm sure we had all at rhabdo over and over repeatedly. And we read in one magazine about that. Whatever we read, it was that a hard leg workout you'll puke, and so we thought that's how you had to. And so, but at the time also we thought we were reading to get a GH burst, you weren't supposed to eat before a workout. So we'd go into our leg workouts on an empty stomach.
Oh my God.
And decide we weren't going to leave till we puked, and then there was nothing to puke. So we started to solve that issue. We started thinking as dumb 17-year-olds to solve that issue. Rather than just realize we don't need to puke every leg workout, we'd eat a can of SpaghettiOs on the way to
the gym. Oh, God.
So it would guarantee we'd puke. And so to show where our minds were, because I was it was just weightlifting in general it completely changed my life. I was a real shy, quiet kid, small kid. Not a loser or anything. I was just a nothing burger. I don't think half the people in school even knew who I was or. And so really everything I have, the ability to play college sports, eventually becoming captain of my football team, captain of my baseball team. Whereas I didn't even start in football until my senior year, where I was named captain. I didn't start in 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade. I guess I started in 10th grade, but only because the good 10th graders got moved up to varsity. And so it was all because of weightlifting.
Wow.
Anyways, I'm going off a total tangent here, but. I can't remember what I was going, but yeah. So that was and one of the SpaghettiOs things. One of the first times we did it actually was in the summer, and we had to drive past a beach that everyone hung out at while on the way to and from the gym. But on the way back from the gym, Mike's side was facing the beach. And so after the leg workout, right when like all the hot girls from school were like getting out of the car, hanging out at the beach, I was driving past when Mike was hanging out in the car window puking all over
Oh,
and,
God.
but like Mike he played linebacker his senior year at 285, I think.
In
So he
high
was just a
school?
monster. Yeah, he was a monster. Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
I feel terrible for the guy because he like this training style. Like I say, like his ability to recover and everything was like I think the only thing that I had on him was my thick joints, and my ability to not get injured, because that didn't work for him. And during one of our stupid, like leg workouts, he fractured his spine, and then and 4 places. Had to have an entire vertebrae removed. He had like multiple surgeries. He was paralyzed for a period of time after one of the surgeries because he was on his stomach for so long. He lost chunk. He had like scoops, ice cream scoops, looked like chunks out of his quads from the tissue dying while he was laying face down for 12-hour surgery. So he went, D1 scholarship, and this happened before camp his freshman year. And, they kept him on scholarship. And he went back and tried to play, again. And then sure enough, because it was like looking back, because we did what we did, he re-injured it squatting again shortly after he recovered, and then was never able to play again and lost his scholarship. He actually did come back because he's the way he is, and we competed in the 2008 APF Michigan powerlifting meet together.
Wow.
And we both, yeah. Well, this is what's awesome. We both competed at 275. We both set the all-time state squat record at 275 with the exact same weight at the exact same.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and that was the last time that's the last meet either of us did. I think I don't know if he ever did another one. And actually, we've kind of fallen off, and we showed up at each other's wedding. But as things happen, as time happens, we have kids and stuff, and lived in different areas of the country. We've kind of fallen out of touch. But yeah, I don't even remember what you asked me now. But that's.
But we were going to talk about training intensity.
We were talking about intensity.
You just didn't know any better.
Techniques.
You didn't know anybody. Techniques.
Yeah.
I thought you said intensity.
I did. Sorry. Led you down that one, Justin. So how about intensity techniques?
Like where those came from, we, again, like dating back to there, we just thought that's why I say kids today have such a luxury with the internet. We didn't. All we had was what Weider fed us, and what Weider fed us was hyperbole, So we thought these guys, that's what they did. Like every workout had to have drop sets and forced reps, and so it started with that, and then it went, it grew to being incredibly overtrained and to kind of isolating it and sorting out what worked and what didn't. But I actually didn't really use a lot of intensity techniques at the bulk of my career. I felt like, and I think Dave and I talked about this once when we talked about volume versus frequency. When when people would talk about leg workouts at 20 sets, I was like the workout we did on Project Super Heavyweight, we did I think I did something like 605 for 8, 545 for 12, 405 for 20 on squats, and then because we did. Do you guys know those Project Super Heavyweight?
Yeah,
okay. For people who don't, Steve Kuko and I wanted to film 2 weeks worth of workouts, but we didn't have any money. And so I got this videographer, and I only had him for 72 hours. So for 3 days. And so we filmed 2 weeks worth of workouts in 3 days. So we did back to back. We did leg workout 1, went in the locker room, changed clothes, and came back and did leg workout 2. And then same thing for back and same thing for push. So yeah, we did. And that was why, if you see, I did the nutrition segment, and my whole body started cramping and shooting up because that was after the leg workout. It was just over. My body had nothing left. But that was a typical leg workout. And then we do stiff leg curls, and I think maybe leg extensions. And people would call that 3 sets of squats. We do 1 set of a Widowmaker leg extension or something, and we do 3 sets to failure for a hamstring. So it's 8 sets for legs, and that's technically low volume, crazy. But so when I hear people doing 20 sets for legs, I'm there's no way you're doing 20 sets with 405 for 20 type intensity.
No.
And so, yeah, I'm just totally off topic and not.
No, that's okay. But I always this always triggers me when like little semantic differences prevent people from coming to an understanding on anything, and it really pisses me off when it comes to training, because like training is what I love. So whenever people talk about volume, and I think John Meadows used to talk about this a lot too, because he noticed what was really going on here. People will talk about low volume and high volume without ever defining or agreeing upon what volume really is. And so if you look at somebody who is known to have done low volume, say Dorian Yates, if you've ever watched like his back workout, I think he does like 7 different exercises still, and on each one of them he warms up, he works up to a top set to failure. Now, what happened on the way up to that set is where the difference really comes in, because if you go to like the way a person typically trains, they might also do a back workout, a back and rear delts, that is also 7 exercises, but I would call it wasting energy, but there may be merit to doing it this way. But if you have a top set you're working up to, rather than conserving energy and just doing a couple of reps on your last couple of warm-ups, you'll actually do your warm-ups with, say, the same rough rep count that you're going for on your top set. So if you're going to work up to a set of barbell rows of 405 for 10, you'll take 135 for 10 to 15, 225 for 10, 315 for 10, and then end with 405 for 8 to 10 to failure. Now, you can argue over whether or not it was smart to do the work on the way up to that set of 405 to failure, but the fact of the matter is that if we're looking at like what really stimulated the growth, it was that top set. So
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I would argue that so I cut you off like I already said I wasn't going to do anymore, but so then the other person is doing the exact same thing. They're doing 135, 225, 315, and 405, but they're just doing with 225, maybe they're doing 4 or 5 reps, and 315 they're doing 2 or 3, and then rather than doing 8 to 10 with 405, they're doing 12 to 13.
Right.
And I would argue that 405 for 12 to 13 is producing more growth than what they do.
Yeah, but I mean, we did get off on a bit of a tangent talking about volume or just intensity in general, but we're going to talk about intensity techniques. And from my standpoint, that is completely relevant, because and when we say intensity techniques, we're talking about things like rest pause sets where you hit failure multiple times with short rest periods between rounds. We're talking about other types of cluster sets where you're hitting maybe one failure point, but you're accumulating fatigue with several bursts, several short rounds of reps, or drop sets, or those. I mean, those are the main 3. What'd you say? Partials. Yeah, extending a set with partials. And I don't think this is the only way to look at it, but I think one good way to look at the use of any of those techniques is basically a way to increase volume in terms of the volume of meaningful or hard reps. Because I think I wouldn't just say I don't like counting volume in terms of number of sets, because as we just said, what is it? A set to one person doesn't count to another. But if I do a rest pause set of, say, I hit failure at 10, and then I rest, and then I hit failure again at 4 reps, and then I hit failure a final time at 3 reps. I accumulated 17 reps, and it's pretty likely that, I don't know, like 8 or 9 of those at least were the effective reps, where they're close enough to failure to stimulate growth. If you compare that to the straight set I could have just done of 10 and hit failure once, that's quite a bit more volume of meaningful stimulus than I racked up in a fairly short amount of time. I don't think that's the only way to look at it, but do you think that's a valid way to look at it? Danny?
Yeah, that's how I would explain it. Meaningful reps, and again, all the literature is going to say somewhere within 2 to 3, reps of failure. And I think there's some caveats to where, especially if you're at like the start of a training block, and some people cannot progress linearly for 4 months at a time, like Dave can. I think it's important to recognize that you can take that first set to 1 RIR, or a very hard one, rather than hitting true concentric failure, so that you have a little bit of a runway. So planning out the intensity techniques is important. But yeah, I think to take something actionable from this, I think people often wonder when and why should I actually use these techniques, and when and why might they be better than just doing straight sets. And so I use rest pause as an example because it's what I like, and it's what I kind of did a lot of because I got into DC training back when it was still the really popular thing to do. And I think rest pause is an awesome way to train. But it's extremely taxing. But aside from being really taxing, you also have to have that ability to take a muscle to true failure. And this is where, this is a whole other topic we could talk about another time, but, there's movements and there are muscles. So if I'm doing a movement for quads, and they say hack squat, and I take that hack squat
to failure to the point where I cannot do another rep. Well, the hex squat's a great quad exercise, and I'm pretty good at using my quads to begin with, so it's very likely that my quads are the limiting factor, and failing a hex squat also meant failing with my quads. So that was a really useful set for growing my quads, where if I'm just doing a barbell squat, and let's say I'm also a beginner who's not very good at using the quads, and I'm using an exercise that's not honestly that great for stimulating quads for a lot of people to begin with.
And it's highly technical.
Highly technical, yeah. So all these factors come into play to where you could go to what we would call task failure on that movement, where you can't do another rep. But the reason you can't do another rep isn't necessarily that your quads have reached muscular failure. And so the kind of what I'm getting at here is that the prerequisite to using any of these intensity techniques in a bodybuilding or hypertrophy context is that you actually have the skill necessary to use that movement to reach failure or to approach failure in the first place. And if that's not the case for you, then you're putting the cart before the horse. You need to instead focus on exercise selection, exercise execution, and really just honing those two things and improving your ability to get to failure or very close to it with a straight set. Would you say the same? Like, would you give balls to the wall rest pause sets to a beginner on a movement they've never done before?
Are you asking that question just to transition the conversation?
Well, I mean, the answer is obviously probably no, but you might have more to say.
No, but I do use intensity techniques in very non-traditional contexts. I'll use intensity techniques with my rehab clients, and that's something that a lot of people don't do. But if you think about it, there's a lot of use and misuse to where the ability to take a set to failure can be limited by, especially in the context of pain or injury, it can be limited by mechanics. It can be limited by soft tissue resilience. It can be limited by workload. It can also be limited by just fear, being scared to actually use the muscle. And so I think which intensity technique you use can largely influence how well you're actually going to come back from injury. And which one you select is going to depend on the muscle itself. It's going to depend on the implement. It's going to depend on the goal. If it's a soft tissue tolerance versus something like a mechanical issue. So like we have a friend who I wrote an article for LFTS looking at the role of intensity techniques in rehab. And I talked about it from the soft tissue standpoint, right? Because anytime we go to load, we're going to ask the soft tissue to respond, especially something like a tendon issue. And so something like, a cluster set, like a 5x5 or a muscle round, if you're a Scott Stevenson fan, is a great way, in my opinion, to look at soft tissue loading because you have a standardized volume. Like, what your volume is going to be. If you're doing a 6x4, you're doing 24 reps. And it allows you to do 4 perfect reps at a time in an environment that is challenging. Like, you can load a weight that allows you to accrue stimulus, and at the same time, if you're scared because of injury, you can do 4 perfect reps. You can focus for 4 reps at a time. It's easier to focus for 4 reps than it is for 20. But if you're using a cluster set on something like, an overhead press machine where you're going to be weak clearing off the pins at the bottom, and you're dealing with a mechanical issue, meaning there's something wrong with your shoulder mechanics that's limiting output, causing pain, setting up for 5 rounds at the point of the range of motion that is most susceptible is probably not the smartest way to go. So I might go for something like a rest pause technique, to where you can actually take it to failure. You're only going to get 3 exposures to the most limited point in the range, or the most painful point in the range. Does that?
Yeah, and to clarify for anyone, so I guess this isn't the only way to do rest pause, but when we say rest pause, we typically mean you're hitting failure 3 times with, I'll say, 30 to 45 seconds in between. Like, when I do it, I take 15 deep breaths between rounds.
I think one of my favorite ways to, just to track progression, again, when I'm working with these edge cases, it's like you have to look at what variables are important and which variables aren't. Volume is one that I look at, because if you take a tissue that hasn't been loaded, and all of a sudden you're loading it for a bajillion reps, that tissue is probably going to get more pissed off. And so you have to really be careful with the dosage and almost be a little bit clinical about it. One of my favorite things to do lately, and this is something I suggested to Dave as he's been dealing with the CFL issues, like, just set a rep goal. If he knows that he's been doing 3 or 4 hard work sets on a leg press and it's accumulated to, let's say, 35 total reps, right? And they're hard, but they're good. Set a rep goal of something stupid like 60 reps. And note when you actually take your breaks, and do them almost as like a breathing style or an extended myo rep set, to where you note how many reps you're getting each kind of mini set. Standardize your rest periods, so you're looking at your work capacity, and over time look to decrease the number of sets needed. But I think that's where, when we look at training as rehab, if you know that you've been doing 35 sets per session, 35 reps to a given movement exposure, you want to look at percentage increase from, say 15 to 20% tops. And again, almost be a little bit clinical, but then once you can do that, you can kind of up the ante a little bit more. So I don't know. I love intensity techniques in rehab because it allows you to look at things like proximity to failure, overall volume, cumulative volume, and almost look at where things are on the checkerboard and look at what you want to move around and say, okay, well, I loaded the tissue in the shorten range and this particular movement I did fine. Like, where else can it's a tendon issue. Maybe I'll start loading the length and range a little bit more. I mean, there's so many ways to get creative and still get a really great stimulus in a really hard session. Even if you're injured via intensity techniques.
I want to add something. So Danny mentioned the example of a set where you're going to hit, say, 60 total reps with some breaks in between, and she kind of called that crazy. And that is an extremely hard set. But if you look at the amount of work that you might do with kind of a different and not so well thought out approach to rehab, it's still quite a bit less work and less potential strain on that tissue. What I mean by that is that I think a lot of people's default move when they are injured and trying to train through that injury is to just do more reps with less weight. And that's also probably going to mean more volume in terms of the number of sets you do. And like Danny said, if a tissue's already a little bit injured and you hammer it away with it over and over again with a bunch of work, you could very well make it worse.
And you're not getting stimulus from it either.
Yeah, you're not getting a meaningful stimulus. And a classic example might be, well, I can't really go to failure and I can't use heavy weights, so I'm going to do 4 sets of 20 on the leg press. So if we're just using the math here, that's 80 reps where you're hammering away at the same tissue, not getting a lot out of it, but you are potentially making it worse. And she's made a lot of good recommendations to me lately using things like clusters on leg training, where it's a weight where my nervous system will at least allow me to move it with pretty good quality without worrying too much about re-injury, to where if I added a couple plates of side stand on leg press, then I would get worried and I would feel the injury more. I wouldn't get great output. It just wouldn't really do anything. But if I look at the total number of reps over, say, a 5x5 cluster, I got a great stimulus out of, I'm going to say, only 25 reps, which is pretty low compared to the alternative. So.
And you're also building up some of the other, again, if we're talking tissue tolerance, you're building up some of the other systems that are going to be support structures for whatever is injured. Yeah,
true. I think I've also noticed, I don't know if you've noticed this or your clients have, but if we're comparing, say, any kind of intensity technique or a cluster set to just a long straight set, with a straight set, there's kind of a unrelenting buildup of feeling. I don't want to quite call it pain, but for lack of a better word, I'll call it pain in the affected area, where rep 1 doesn't feel too bad. Rep 2 still doesn't feel too bad, but it's building to where time you get to rep 15 or 20, you're like, man, this is on fire, and now every rep I'm a little bit worried about retweaking it. Whereas with the cluster set, even if you're only giving yourself 10 to 12 seconds between the rounds of the cluster, your lungs are on fire, the muscle's on fire, but that sensation where it's almost painful kind of dies down every time you get to rest a little bit between the rounds of the cluster. And for me, that's one of the things that makes it such a useful tool, because personally, I get to be a little bit of a head case when I get an injury, and even if the tissue is not that damaged, I'm worried about it a lot. So if I can just minimize the perception of pain with something like that makes it the most productive thing I can do.
I think it's what you're hitting on that's really important is the mental component and the fear associated with pain. Anytime someone hurts, there's almost this kind of internal chaos that happens, and it's just this internal entropy almost. And so the more you expose yourself to that, and especially if it's prolonged, that's going to reset your baseline. And so one of the things, and a lot of my clients are going to laugh if they watch this, because I hold my notebook and I draw this little graph and I say, this is your line. When you're above that line, you're symptomatic. When you're below it, you're okay. And I think what happens for a lot of people with their training is they hover just below that symptomatic line and then right above it. And so they never really give themselves enough clearance to be able to train hard. And so when you're talking about that kind of extended straight set, you're just constantly climbing and even getting over that line a little bit, rather than being able to really tiptoe right up to it and come back and still get the load exposure. And I think there's a lot to be said for just having the confidence to man, I actually was able to push a set with an injured tissue today. And the confidence part and the mental side of this is so much more powerful than people think it is.
Mm-hmm. it's just like any kind of bodybuilding training, whether you're injured or not. The more good sessions, at least good, maybe not great, but good sessions you can string together without any mishaps, the better. And that goes for whether you're in like full bore, no injured training, or whether you're trying to come back from injury. You have anything else?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. That's a brief but hopefully helpful episodes 12. We will see you all next week. Let's just hit stop this time.
For more content like this, visit www.teamtroponin.com.
This video is brought to you by First Attachment Nutrition, battle-tested nutrition, expert formulated supplements. Join the First Attachment revolution.